Welcome everyone to this week's episode of Catholic Re.Con Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And this week's guest, he comes by way of a good friend of mine, Dave Fortin, who I don't know if I've mentioned him before. He was on the show maybe a month or two ago. And in case you forgot, he has a podcast called Along the Way, and I invite you to check that out. Anyway, Dave said, got to speak with Aaron Joseph, my good friend. And I'm going to say a few things about Aaron, and then we'll get started here. He's a consecrated disciple, highlighting St. Joseph, and he's also a Catholic life photographer. And he resides in Connecticut. This thing is fascinating to me. With his priest / spiritual director's blessing, he made private perpetual vows to live as a consecrated disciple of Jesus, the Son of God and son of Joseph and Mary. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eddie. It's a pleasure being here.
So what I mentioned about Dave, first of all, I'm assuming you've been on Dave's program.
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to mention about his program and my program and others like it, that a lot of people will come in saying, I have a testimony. I have a story. I have this journey back to the faith, or to the faith in the first place. And lo and behold, there are so many connecting points to that core message, that core testimony. In other words, whether you have a career that starts once you convert, or you start a family, there are so many things that happen as a result of that core journey. And we'll explore that. But this is what I love about Dave. You go down these different paths, and they all flow back to this core of trying to understand truth, trying to find truth, and this search. So I don't know if that's teeing up anything for you, but I wanted to mention that up front, that I think that's phenomenal. So the floor is yours. I'd love to hear, Aaron, where this all began.
Well, my faith journey began, of course, it all begins when we were little kids. And, I grew up as a ward of the state of Connecticut as a foster child. And, some people may relate to the idea of St. Joseph being foster father of Jesus, but, as most people know, if you're a ward of the state, parents get paid to take care of you, et cetera. And typically, well, it depends on the family, but sometimes you're not always welcomed as part of the family. You're kind of considered a black sheep. And, I grew up through 3 foster homes and 2 institutions. And my third foster home, that was, where I had the longest year. And I was pretty much always known by my foster siblings as Mama's boy. And it's funny, I never liked it then, but if anybody calls me a Mama's boy today, I like it now, in relationship to our Blessed Mother. But so I grew up again as a ward of the state, didn't have any faith other than what I would see on TV, or nurturing, I should say, via movies like the Ten Commandments, or even Jesus of Nazareth, and I did have some minor Bible instruction in one of the institutions, but it was really nil. There was one constant that I did have in my third foster home. My foster mother, she owned a thrift shop, and she sold images of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Even though she was Protestant, she sold these images, and various sizes and stuff. So I always had one, like a 11 by 14 in my bedroom, hanging on the wall. And and sometimes, when we grow up, sometimes we don't always have the best of times. Our friends don't always treat us well, et cetera, or people we sometimes hoped that would be our friends.
Yeah.
And so I would always pray, Jesus, tomorrow I'll be better, because I always, if something didn't turn out right, I always blame myself. And I wouldn't call it masochistic, but I always thought, what could I do to make it better? versus, somebody else is just wrong in what they're doing. So, there was always this striving, again, to do better.
Sure.
But in the light of God, even though I didn't like have formation, and even though I didn't, have that from even my, foster family, because nobody really talked about God in that context.
Well,
And
let
so,
me ask you this. You said that by the third foster family, how many years? I mean, that
so,
must have been
so I was
very challenging just to transition from one to another.
yeah, so I was taken out when I was 18 months old, and I wasn't very conscious at that time, because we're little kids, our minds are growing and everything.
Yeah.
And I stayed with the first foster home until I was about 6, and then the second foster home was really it was like a summer transition until they found another more permanent
Okay.
foster home. Um, but it was not a great summer. Um, and then I came to Enfield, Connecticut. It was always in Connecticut, because once you're a ward of the state, you're kind of locked in.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, I was told, like, later on, I was like, well, yeah, if we ever move out of state, we got to get permission and this and this and this and transfer and everything. So
Wow.
some of the logistics. So, I was always in Connecticut. And so then, um, pretty much from the age of 6 until, really through, everything college. Now, the third foster home, I lived with a foster mother and husbands 3 and 4. And so it wasn't, and she was old enough to be my grandmother. And so her kids were old enough, I did, her youngest was 6 years older than me, but she had 2 other kids that were um, much older. Matter of fact, my foster nephew, as it were, was only 6 months younger than me,
Okay.
and we were very good friends. And I always used to look forward to spending time. They lived in a couple towns away in Massachusetts, and but I always enjoyed spending time with him. I mentioned them because when I was in my foster home, I asked my social worker at the time if he could find my parents. And because people were saying my parents were institutionalized, my parents were dead, my parents were this, my parents were that. So I asked him, can you find out what happened to my parents? And so he actually found them. And, and he set up a meeting, we met. And then over time, there would be, an increase in visitation, to kind of get to know them. And, the social worker had to gain some trust that, they wouldn't hurt me or abuse me or anything. And
You were a teenager at this point, or how old were you?
I was like 9 years old,
Oh, wow. Okay.
eight or nine when this started.
Yeah.
And in his third foster home, like I said, I lived with, the foster woman, and over, husbands 3 and 4. And but husband 3, he was the only one in my memory that really took time for me, like, to nurture me, to teach me something. He taught me how to pitch, play baseball, and I actually made the all-star team as a pitcher that year. And but it was like the only year in my youth that I was allowed to play sports, because my foster mother basically, um, once her third husband died, she just wanted to have fun. And she joined Parents Without Partners, and she just basically said, as far as Boy Scouts or sports or anything, she said, I did those things with my kids. I'm not doing those things with you. And it's like, well, why do you have a foster kid then?
Yeah.
But I didn't know enough, to say anything even to my social worker. So I just, I mean, what you know, and you're afraid of what you don't know. And so, and what I mean by, you're afraid of going to a different foster home, and something that's unfamiliar. You don't know what you're going to get there either.
Wow. So you just say, I'll just be quiet and see what
Yeah.
happens.
What can you do?
Yeah.
So I had somewhat of an isolated. I mean, I went to school, but I I had a very isolated childhood. I was basically told, just come home, clean house, and that was my life. And mow the lawn. It's like so that was my life. And then in high school, I did kind of rebel a little bit. And I said, well, I'm going to do sports. And I played football, ran track, and basically I had to get my own rides. One time I called my foster mother for a ride home from school, and she berated me the whole time home. So I'm like, okay, that was it. I was going to ask her ever again. And she never came to any of my games or any of my meets, and just had no support. Um, and I bring this up as is not complaining about it. I don't need therapy, but just trying to set the stage a little bit.
No, it actually is helpful. Yeah.
So like I said, I mentioned my foster nephew who we'd enjoyed times together, because what happened with the gradual visitation of my blood family, for lack of a better term, um, my that third husband passed away, and it was just before I was entering sixth grade, and he died a few days before my birthday. His funeral was on my birthday, and I wasn't allowed to go. And my blood family and foster mother had already arranged that they would have a birthday party, that following at a campground, because we did used to go camping, and so my 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 blood father said to my foster mother, said, your husband has just died, and so we're going to take Aaron. And when my foster mother told me that, I just thought that was the coldest thing that somebody could say, because basically, like I said, all of her kids were older, and at the time I think they were all moved out. Maybe that one that was 6 years older, maybe he was still around for a little bit, I don't recall, but mostly, I was like her companion, her only companion at the time. And I just thought, hey, she just lost her husband, my foster father. And I'm like, you're just pulling everything away from her. And also there was other things like, my blood family was like, I didn't, I was just getting to know them. And, they were kissy. And here it is, you got this, like 9-year-old boy, who pretty much doesn't like that anyway. And they're kind of forcing their affections on me. They were on welfare, and they were trying to buy my affections, and like they give me things, and if I go visit them, they give me things, and then I come home to the foster home, and then they yell at me for accepting things because they were on welfare. And it's like, how dare you accept things from them? And I'm like, you want me to do? I'm like, so it became very stressful, and I remember praying to God, and I said, just let me, let them just like go away, and let me meet them when I'm older, and I'm on my own. I don't need, them buying me things, and we can meet more, one on one. And it's actually, that's how it happened. They wrote me a letter, because this is before emails, texts, and phones, and as we have them today. And they wrote me a letter, and of course, as a little boy, I didn't respond. And but they never connected with me again, which actually, like I said, it was an answer to a prayer anyway. And I had never expressed to anybody this except to our Lord. And when I was done with college, I got a job, pretty far away from here. It was a good commute. It was an hour each way a day. And I had to go visit a dental office. I had some a dental problem, and the dental hygienist, again, back then, was doing paperwork, and I I I had legally changed my name to Joseph. So formally it used to be Aaron Brooks. And she goes, Aaron Brooks. She goes, I know Arlene Brooks, who looks just like you. And I said, that's my sister. And that following weekend, I reconnected with my parents, because she told me where she knew my sister from. It was a woman's gym in the area. And so I called up and connected, and without getting into too much detail, like I said, I reconnected with my family, and like I said, that was an answer to a prayer, a beautiful answer. And so I met him, and it was still stressful after that. It was, there was ups and downs.
How many years had passed?
Well, I was like 22,
Wow.
so like 12, or so years. So, and which I had no connection with them. And yeah. And and then like I said, I had times where I would stop visiting them for years, because it was just um and this is more a conversion story, but it was just like, when I felt the need that, I just needed to separate myself from them because I needed to grow and I needed to find myself. Um, sometimes even though they're your blood family, sometimes you need to do things like that. And I did. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So yeah, so that was pretty much my upbringing. And so shortly after college, I was dating somebody a little bit younger than me, 4 years younger. So she was still going to school, and we got engaged. And and then we hit some rocky times, and she got smart and broke up with me. And but back then we used to write letters to each other, and I had I used to save all the letters, and I kept them in the spare bedroom in the house, my foster home that I was living in. My foster mother did pass away when I was in college, but I still lived with her fourth husband. And so one time I was cleaning out that spare bedroom, and I was going through those old letters, and I was reading them in a different light than when they were first given to me by my ex fiance. And I was saying that I needed to grow, I needed to change. And there were other things that were happening in my life. And when I became single, I started to go out with friends, and we'd go out to bars, and once like a strip club, and I'm like, I don't want to live like this. I remember being in a local restaurant, late at night, and like almost everybody there is drunk, and I'm like, I really don't want to be living this way. um so and that's when to me my conscience was waking up, and I knew I needed to change, and I really I knew I needed to find God. And I remember asking him, I said, because a good friend also at that time, he started dating a woman, they got pregnant, and then they got married, and it didn't work out, but he wanted to start going back to church in 1990 as a New Year's resolution. He grew up Catholic, and for the sake of his son mostly. And so he asked me if I'd go with him. And my thought in my head was, and what my prayer was to God was, there must be a church that has the fullness of the truth. Please lead me to that church. So my plan was, okay, I'll go with my buddy, this weekend to the Catholic church, and then next week I'll go down the road to the Baptist church, and then the following week, go down to the Methodist church, etc.
Because
You know,
you had not been to church growing up at all, right? Or do you have some experiences of walking into various churches?
not well, yeah. So okay, so I did get some religious education at a local congregational church that my foster mother used to go to, but I got kicked out of it because I used to crawl under the desks, and I used to, just be a nuisance. So I actually got kicked out of Sunday school.
Oh,
So, but that was it. I mean, I don't remember anything from those days except for
yeah,
that part of it. Um, so there was that. Maybe like later on, because before this time, later on when I was going to college, um, I yeah, I went to a wedding or two.
got it.
Some foster siblings or other relatives. But that was about it. It was nothing on a regular basis. Nothing like every Sunday or something.
Got it. So your plan was, like you said, to go with a buddy to the Catholic Church and then maybe Try the Baptist church.
And then be open to God's grace,
Yeah.
to just discern, where, and so sometimes we have these plans, and then, and then we don't do anything about it. So I just kept on, the easy thing was to go with my buddy every week to the Catholic Church. And so that's what I did. I never did go to the other churches, but, over time, I learned it's like, oh, this is, the church founded by Jesus. And this is, this is the real deal. And, even though, it may not be perfect in its members, but it is perfect. I don't know the exact term, but it is perfect in itself, the church that Jesus founded. So, in all of its sacraments and, et cetera. So it's, I'm very glad where I ended up. And, and then over time, so I entered the church. Well, okay. So let me, so, I was going to church with my buddy every Sunday. And then I wanted to receive instruction because I wanted to enter church because, it's like everybody would go up for communion and I couldn't go up for communion.
Yeah.
And so I asked the pastor, and he was the founding pastor of the parish. And I asked him, can I receive instruction? So, we set up time, and I went, and, everybody, all of us, we all have different styles and how we do anything pretty much. And his style of teaching was ask him questions, he'll answer them. And I'm like, after the first few, which is like the standard, unknowing, the kind of almost ignorant question, but, there's some, I can't say ignorant question, but, the idea of like, oh, I think I only remember the first question. If God exists, why is the world so messed up? Type of thing, and then the others were kind of like that, kind of like, just kind of, and it's not coming from unbelief. I believed in God, but I just wanted to hear an answer.
Yeah.
From somebody who, I thought was, because the perception is also, you think that, everybody you talk to knows the fullness of the faith. And, you think they're in church, and whether they're a priest or a layperson, you think that, oh, they, there's some structure to this, and like everybody knows everything. And then, once you get in it, you realize that, it depends on how interested anybody is, and, how much they participate truly in the fullness of the faith, whether it's devotion to saints or whether, whatever it is. And you realize that not everybody knows everything, and then you realize there's so much to, there's so much to learn, and, our faith is so full. But because the pressure was on me to ask him questions and have him respond, after the first two meetings, I just didn't show up anymore. And, the bad thing on my part is I didn't even call him. It's like, but, because it was just like, like I said, it was too much pressure on my part. So, but at that time, I had moved jobs, and so I was working actually in town. And I had a coworker in my unit who grew up at my local parish. And she told me about the parochial vicar and said, and I'll mention, just say Father Stanley, she says, I hear Father Stanley does RCA, and I hear he's pretty good. And so I called him up, and so because I, was working in town, we set up a lunchtime meeting. And I remember going there, and, he welcomed me in, sat me down on a couch. He sat down in a chair, and he just started teaching me, from a philosophical view of why it's logical to seek God. And it was beautiful. And I remember going back to work, and this woman, Anna, she was the first person I saw in my area, and she goes, how was it? And I was just like, and I was just so excited. I can't even really, reenact, but it was just, this is what I was looking for. It was just so exciting. And so, we just kept on meeting, and then I got another job, in Hartford. And so, we had to move to nighttime appointments, and sometimes, Father Stanley, he's a dear friend. He's my pre-spiritual director, the one you were alluding to at the beginning.
Yeah.
He's a dear friend. He really is a father figure for me. I worked with him after for like 10 years intimately, at the parish, because I ended up working there. And I helped him move down to South Carolina where he is now, and we still talk all the time. And I went down in 2018 for his 50th anniversary of ordination, and et cetera. So we're really close. Um, but sometimes he's not the best at keeping appointments. He sometimes forgets his calendar, and it's funny because when I was working um, at the parish afterwards, and people would come to the door and say, "I have an appointment with Father," and I'm like, "Yeah, he must have forgot because he's not here." And I'm like, "Don't worry, it's happened to me too." And I'm like, just give me your name and number, and I'll have him when he gets back. Sorry about that. And yeah, he just didn't he would just not look at his calendar for the day, and he just think he could do whatever. And yeah, because sometimes we'd miss appointments, and then and I only mention that because then it would put the time when I could enter the church, it would move it back or whatever forward, whatever it is. And so that got frustrating, because normally I wouldn't care necessarily about missing appointments, but then it would be, oh, now it's another week or something. And then I remember one time, and it was after I moved down to Hartford for a job, and so we were meeting in the evening, and we had a meeting, and he got this phone call, and I remember I was sitting there crying, and because I started thinking about, Lord, when, because I was really thirsting, hungering or thirsting, for to receive Jesus. And it's sometimes things don't go according to our time plan, and it's
Okay.
not that impatient, but we're just, it's like, when, how long, Lord, how long? It's like, and so eventually we made a plan, and to enter the church on December 8th, 1990. I didn't have to wait for Easter. And so, the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, I received all three sacraments of initiation. So, first baptism, it was a Saturday that year, and this is 1990, and I think it had to be before they changed, at least in America, where they changed, where if a few of those holy day of obligations were ran on a Saturday or a Monday, then you're not obliged,
That's right. Okay.
a few of those. And I think the Immaculate Conception is one of them, that if it falls on a Saturday, Monday, but because this year in 1990, we basically had our Sunday schedule. And so I think it was like 8, 9:15, 10:30, and 12. So it was between the 10:30 and the 12 mass. I was baptized and confirmed, and then at the 12 mass, I received First Holy Communion. And it was a wonderful, it was the beginning of things. The one thing about my pre-spiritual director is, he taught me about, of course, our Lord, but he also emphasized a lot about Our Lady. He introduced me to the Marian apparitions, which sometimes could bring a lot of light, in addition to the standard catechesis.
Yeah.
And like Fatima, Lourdes, etc. And he'd give me books to read on Our Lady. And so when I was working in Hartford, I used to take the bus in, and so that I would use that as time to read and pray the Rosary. And so it was a very beautiful, nurturing time. So, like I said, I entered the church in 1990, and
Who was
actually,
there, by the way? I have to ask you that. Who
sorry.
made it to the baptism, the confirmation? Who was there for that? Did you have some
So
friends there?
my ex-fiance's parents,
Oh, wow.
her father was ended up being my godfather, because it was like, who do I know that are
Yeah.
Catholics? And
Yep.
and actually, it's funny because so her mom grew up in England, and so she was Protestant, and she never converted. And her dad was Catholic, and her and her sister and her brother grew up Catholic, even though I have to admit that we probably didn't live it. Um, but yeah, so I look to him. I really I respect the man. He really he was a good figure for me in my later years when I was with her. I respect it. I do respect him. He's older now. But still, and I don't see him as much as I should. But yeah. So like I said, I entered the church, and then I just wanted to grow. It became a central part of my life, and so that was 1990, and so I was starting. The things we see in parishes, and depends on where we are, and depends on who's assigned. But you got married people and you got priests, and sometimes that's all we say. But my priest friend, Father Stanley, he introduced me to religious communities and actually would brought me around to visit a couple. And then I'd go to some events where some other like Franciscans would be and stuff, and so I got familiar with them. I started to discern religious life. I discerned a little bit with the Capuchins. I'd go on like a weekend, little discernment weekend with them, and I talked to their vocation director, and actually did psychologicals with them, and they just thought I was a little bit immature in my faith. Being only in the church at that time, probably like just a couple of years, because I think I discerned with them more in '92, and then in '93. Actually, and I'd warned my management that I was discerning this, and chances are that I was going to leave somewhat shortly. I figured a couple of months and stuff, and I just felt compelled one day to go visit a Franciscans of the Immaculate. Their only house in the U.S. at the time was in New Bedford, Mass, which is a couple hours away from where I live. And I felt compelled to go visit them, and I really felt compelled to enter there, because I visited. I just went there. I just went there with a bag. I showed up. I'd written them a letter, didn't get a response, but I showed up at the door, and the superior comes to the door and he goes, "Okay, well, welcome. Come in." And and I stay with them for the weekend, and I asked them if I could spend more time with them. And so I went to work on that Monday, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm giving you a day's notice." And basically I entered them as a candidate on May 13th of 1993, Our Lady of Fatima. I mentioned that because I stayed with them for about 5 months, and then I went to go visit another community who I had been talking to previously, and the abbot of that community recommended I because of my Marian dimension, visit in a long-term way the Franciscans of the Immaculate. And so when I was with them, and I just felt like they were a little bit too active, and I wanted something kind of more cloistered, more monastic. And so I left them, and I went to the Maronite monks of in Petersham, Mass. And I stayed with them for a few weeks, and I woke up one morning, and I just knew that wasn't where I was supposed to be. But what I learned from these, actually, I still carry with me today. So it wasn't like I just like wasted time learning. I don't think anybody ever does. There was something I was listening to recently where somebody was talking about, kind of making a mistake by, like, discerning or looking at something. And I'm like, I don't think that anything we do, I think God allows us and really kind of directs us sometimes to go to places, learn things, and then, move on. And, and to me, that's what these were wonderful experiences. I learned about, having a regular schedule of the day, so, regular prayer, trying to balance that with work, etc. But the biggest thing, which again, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The biggest thing that I learned was the appreciation of a patron.
Okay.
Because it was over time, so after I came home, I was trying to just discern, God, what do you want from me? And sometimes, we all experience that. There's kind of this, we feel lost. We don't, what is God calling me to do? What is he, what is he calling me to be, etc. And I remember even my godfather even saying, it looks like you're searching. And when you're in it, sometimes you don't realize it's like, yeah, you are. And sometimes you just think, no, I'm not searching, I'm fine, I'm where I am.
Yeah.
you know and but then you look back, like, yeah, I was searching. So I had one priest friend who had great devotion to Saint Therese and of the Child Jesus, and he started a women's group, and he wanted to start a men's group, and I was part of that, and for a little bit, and that fell through. And but I would read her writings, and certain things click with you, certain things don't. We all have different personalities, we all are called to different devotion and stuffs, and that's the discernment process. Like, not everybody is called to be a Dominican, not everybody's called to be a Franciscan, etc. And
Well, speaking of that, when you said, you left that last place and maybe you're getting to that, did you ever return to any type of monastic community or,
no, no. So that is what I'm getting to. So then so then when I came home, I had to work, and in order to have a car, in order to get around, do things, and I was working, with my priest friend too, as much as I could. We do special projects and stuff. And so he he commissioned an icon of Our Lady of Connecticut, and basically what happened, he saw on a cover of a religious magazine, he saw Our Lady of the New Advent, and it's a icon that was commissioned by Archbishop Stafford at the time in preparation for the new millennium, year 2000. And what the iconographer did is he took a traditional icon, Our Lady of the Sign, which has Our Lady with Jesus in her womb, a sign shall be given, a virgin shall give birth, etc. And what he did was, he, instead of having gold as the background, he had it purple for Advent colors, and he put allusions to the Rocky Mountains. And in the traditional icon, it would have our Lord holding the book of life in one hand and blessing with the other, and he had him holding the state flower, the columbine, which actually is, if you look it up in a dictionary, it's called it. The shape of the flower is kind of like dove-like, so then I relate to the Holy Spirit, so things like that. So what Father Stanley did was, he said, "Hey, if they can do that for Colorado, why can't we do one for Connecticut?" And so he asked a local iconographer. He gave him his idea. It's a kind of a drawing, a rough draft, where he took, he has, like the Connecticut River, and he has, from the state flag has 3 grape arbors on a shield, and it's on a field of blue, and it has a ribbon running through the bottom that says "Qui transtulit sustine," he who transplanted sustains. And so he's like, well, God transplants us into his kingdom via baptism, and he sustains us by the Eucharist, etc. So he brought in all these themes, and like I said, he gave the iconographer a rough sketch of his idea, and then he just left it with him, and he embellished, and he did a beautiful job, and it's in our parish church today.
That's great.
But so this was dedicated, this icon, we had, we would have New Year's Eve ceremonies where we would pray for reparation for the past year. So we started like 11 o'clock at night, and then we at midnight we'd have a mass, and we'd ask for blessings of the upcoming year. And so we took this, my priest friend took this opportunity to bless the icon, and and it was like shortly after that, like I'd just be there, and I'd start praying with the icon, and I'd start just getting these ideas, these relationships, symbolic meanings of things, and and they're very personal to me. But there's that. Then there is certain scriptures, especially the wisdom texts, and of course the rosary, and so this combination that really was forming my own spiritual life. And then on March 1st, 1995, I was praying actually while I was working because like I said, I had to take a job in order to have a car, in order to get
Yeah.
around things, and so I took a job delivering pizzas for a local chain, and so while as long as I knew where I was going when I was out delivering pizzas, I would pray the rosary. And so I was praying this day. This is Wednesday, March 1st. So it was the first Wednesday of the month of March. And we'll talk about it later. And because I had no idea what that meant other than it was Ash Wednesday. So it's funny because that day I was delivering a lot of meat lovers pizzas. But, yeah. I guess we were Egypt that day.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it was, yeah. But while I was out praying, delivering pizzas and praying, I felt the presence of Saint Joseph, and I never felt that before. My devotion to Saint Joseph prior to this was very minimal. I think I prayed. I don't know if you ever seen the Pieta book, and so it's a book that somebody compiled of various prayers, and as the Pieta,
Yeah. On the cover.
yeah, on the cover, and so one of them is like this, 1,500-year-old prayer to Saint Joseph, and so I prayed that a couple of times, and I remember when I was with the Franciscans in New Bedford, Mass, they had huge statues, on either side of the sanctuary of Our Lady and Saint Joseph, and I remember like one night, probably, that's probably about it, one night, kneeling down praying to him. But really, it was very limited. But I felt his presence at this time on March 1st, 1995. And I felt him ask if I'd be willing to learn about him. And I, of course, said yes. And then I felt, again, a little bit over time, I felt the presence of Our Lady. And I have to explain this part a little bit. But I felt her ask me if I'd be willing to be her spouse. And it's just to be understood in the context of, basically she was asking me if I would be willing to love her as St. Joseph did, spiritually speaking.
Yeah.
And it's like over time, giving interviews to different people, I've learned I have to refine my messaging, because one time I mentioned that to somebody and they're like, well, St. Joseph, provided and protected her. And it's like, yeah, that's not what I mean. What I mean was really taking her heart to his own. And that's what we're to do. It's the whole idea of consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, is we're to take her heart to our own. And we could say, we value what she values. It's one way of looking at it, but really it's taking the wisdom of her heart. And it's that life nurturing wisdom that leads us to Christ, because that's her role. And so it really is this intimate, but in the spirit of St. Joseph. And see, that's where I learned over time, this part of it. But so when people sit there and say, spouse of Mary, but also the idea that, later on, because of this, I made private vows. And to me, it was because of who I am to be personally. I mean, there's a spirituality that I share with people, but they don't need to make private vows in order to live it. But for me, I'm to be dedicated to this. It's something like, these communities I visited where they live a particular spirituality, and like the Franciscans of the Immaculate, like many Franciscan communities and Dominican communities and Benedictine communities, they have, a lay association where, lay people even participate in the spirituality. They learn it. They may take promises, et cetera, down, like I have a good friend who's, a couple of them, they're doing it together. They're become lay Dominicans, and it's a 5-year program, et cetera. So, but for me, it's supposed to be a certain level of commitment. And so for me, for her to ask me if I'd be willing to be her spouse, and there is, Blessed I think it's Alan de la Roche. He was also given the grace of being a spouse of Mary, as it were. And I believe there were a couple others, but he's probably the most popular ones. And so, because people, when they first hear that, it's like, oh, what are you talking about? And kind of like, maybe I'm crazy, but
No,
no, like it has to be,
explanation
it has
very
to be, kept in context. But
exactly.
then, even after that, I felt the presence of the communion of saints. They love all of us, but they were sharing at their time their love for me. And at the time, because again, I was discerning, and I knew Saint Teresa, the Child of Jesus, she would pray, give me double your spirit, or whatever geometric ratio, And so I said, give me a million times your spirit. But the way I look at it is this family. I was talking to my priest spiritual director the other day, and I was saying, so many people focus on Saint Joseph being a model husband and father, and this past Monday was the it's not a church universal feast, but it was the feast of the holy espousals of Mary and Joseph. And it's some families within the church, like the Oblates of Saint Joseph, and some other families in the church actually are allowed to have a mass based on this grace. And again, it's not a church universal thing, but I was encouraging people on social media to while there wouldn't be a mass for it, but still um you know just be open to that wonderful grace. But I was referring to it because some people, when they talk about it, they say, we need this feast because it helped families and stuff. And yes, okay, I don't disagree with that, but I focus on the idea you know um that they are our spiritual parents. It's more the individual, loving them. Saint Joseph as patron, and patron means is model and intercessor, and it's connected to Mary, and then again she leads us to Jesus. But just that idea of being devoted to them as our spiritual parents. And then when you think about them, as kind of our spiritual parents, and then you think of all of their children, that's we have the communion of saints, we have the souls in purgatory, and we have church militant. It's like we're all one big family. And that's really where my devotion has grown through the years. I offer masses as much as possible. I have limited financial means, but as much as I can, I offer masses for all souls in purgatory because, somebody was saying, what are you trying to empty the place? I'm like, hey, whatever I can do. But
That's
it's just,
beautiful. And then I think that you have this incredible connection to the family. It's even more amplified because of what you came from. I mean,
yeah,
how beautiful is that?
yeah, and that, I definitely want that as part of the message, but I don't want that as the only part of the message. Like when there was I got interviewed for a documentary, and the person that was whatever their title was regarding this producer or whatever, when he was being interviewed and he was talking about there's six of us that were interviewed for this documentary, and he was going through all six of them, and he mentions and Aaron Joseph, he didn't grow up with a family, and so now he sees this family dimension, and it's great for those who don't have families. And I'm like, okay, yes, as my pre-spiritual director says, grace builds on nature. Fine. I was given this grace. Yes, I had a deficit when I was growing up. I have this grace now, very spiritual grace. But let's not just keep it as it, they are only for those who don't have families. I mean, it's just, it's
Great.
like, it's like Saint Teresa of Avila, who, when she lost her mother, she, looked more towards Mary. And when she lost her father, she looked more towards Saint Joseph too. He came into the picture in even a greater way. But we shouldn't just, even from her perspective, look at Saint Joseph just as, father to the childless, as it were, because it's,
Good point. No, I
yeah,
think people come to the realization through many different routes, even if they do have a stable upbringing. I
yeah,
think that God clearly uses those experiences, I think, to shine light
that's
to
right.
certain circumstances. Like we've talked about Mother Mary, how if someone had, um, I've talked to enough people to know, that some of these men and women, if they had wounds from childhood related to a motherly figure, they initially are standoffish and they don't understand how this love works. They just have, like you said, you nailed it when you said a deficit. They have a
Right.
deficit, and then over time, God's showing them, no, you don't understand. This
Yeah.
is this is beautiful, and it's beautiful for those again that had a stable upbringing and those that did not. He just will use all these different.
Yeah. Yeah. And others can learn from us, or we can learn from everybody else,
Yeah.
everybody else's experience, which is a wonderful thing. So that's, really, that was the beginning of something that became beautiful. And like I said, I mentioned May 13th, 1993, when I first went to go stay with, on a long trip basis with the Franciscans of the Immaculate. When I received this grace on March 1st of 1995, I got to make sure I get my years. Sometimes I, get interviewed and I re-listen or watch and I got my years mixed up. It's like, I think I said I came into the church December 8th, 1995. I'm like, no, it's 1990. It's so I got to make sure in my head I keep my years straight. So, the original grace of going to discern religious life on May 13th, 1993. And then I received, this blessing. And I have to state one other thing beforehand. So I had this grace while I was out delivering pizzas, praying the rosary, you know, kind of having a visitation, as it were, St. Joseph, Our Lady, the Communion of Saints. Very and it was kind of funny because there's another thing that was quite odd is, when you're delivering pizzas, you get your order, you go deliver them, they pay you, you go back to the shop and you pay, and then you go out with another order. It got so busy that, and this is the first, I worked there for 2 years, and it was the only time that I would go back and have to run out and didn't pay until the end of my shift. And I was leaving early. I was leaving at 3 o'clock because I had to go give a talk to a young a children's cenacle on the icon of Our Lady, Connecticut, of all things. And but the thing is, it was like, to me, it was to keep me on the road so I would pray. And it was even my manager said, I've never seen it like this. And so I left there 3 o'clock, and I needed to go. I had done some writing on the icon and a little bit of the spirituality that I was seeing in it. And I had to go to the rectory of the parish to make copies. And I took it as an opportunity to speak to my pre-spiritual director. Now, it also is his day off, so I wasn't sure whether he was going to be there or not. So I asked the secretary, is like, is Father Stanley home? He's like, yeah, he's upstairs, just holler for him. So I did. And he says, yeah, I'll be right down. And so it's like, so we sat down and because I told him, I said, I have to talk to you about something that happened today. And I took a while to get it out. And he was like, well, just start. Because it's like, it's one of those things when you receive these types of graces that, that anything you say is going to diminish it. It's going to dim it, because there's nothing that you could say which equates to the beauty of the experience. And so so basically, I started and, I told him what happened, and he says, well, do you know what today is? Well, it's Ash Wednesday. He says, no, today is the first Wednesday. Now, I didn't know, like, most devout Catholics know about First Fridays, First Saturdays, related to our Lord, the Sacred Heart, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But many do not know. Some, a lot do. The first Wednesday of the month is attached to St. Joseph. I didn't know that. And in the month of March, of course, because his solemnity is 19th. And so even, you go through the 12 months, somebody shared on social media recently, all the 12 months and the major mysteries that are attached to each of the 12 months. And, of course, March is St. Joseph. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that. And so he said, well, let's pray for a grace, a sign, that this is of God. And so we prayed, and then we had an evening mass because it was Ash Wednesday that day. And I remember, because I served the mass, and then I was cleaning up afterwards, the cruets, et cetera. And so I was going to the sacristy. He came flying out, and he was, I got my sign. I'm like, okay, I didn't need a sign because I experienced it, but and it was funny because we would always have this throughout our life, especially when he was still in Connecticut, and he would ask for signs, and he'd get them, and it'd be really cool because there's a special day. He actually wrote about it. It says a day I'll always remember, and it happened later on, concerning my apostolate. But so because of what was being asked of me, I thought I needed to make private vows. And so I was, we had a school. It closed a couple of years ago, but we still have the complex. But I was walking down the school hallway, and I just I had is like, and I didn't even know what the calendar said, and I just said, if May 13th is on a Saturday, I'll make it then. And it was, and it must have been a leap year because it was only 2 years from Wednesday to Saturday, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
It must have been a leap year somewhere in there. And because it moved 3 days versus the just, normally would have been just a Friday. But so I made my private vows. We had about 30 people in attendance. We had a mass, and I made my private vows, and I quit work, and I was just dedicating myself wholly to working at the parish. And I worked there for from that time until the end of 2004. And he had left in 2002 to go down to South Carolina. But it just grew from there. And then in so then I had my writings on the origin of the icon, how Father was inspired with it, and then the symbols that went into it, and then the providential happening about how it came about, because it's two pieces. There's the icon itself, and then there's a casing to it, which has it's just it's a flat casing where the icon fits into it in the back, and it has doors. It's a beautiful icon.
Wow.
So there were two people that were working on, the two pieces, the iconographer and then a cabinet maker. And, Father Stanley was, they were both promised within a short time, a few months turnaround time. And it was going on and on and on and months and months. And just before, basically it was around the beginning of October, there's actually ended up being three things, because he actually went to pilgrimage, leading a pilgrimage somewhere, and he met this woman and her daughter, and around the beginning of October he gets this call from this woman, and they caught up on, he gave the daughter some spiritual direction, and so the mother was giving him an update and says, "Father, I'd really like to do something for you." And and he was just thinking, well, pray a Hail Mary for me or something. And then she says, no, my husband's president of an insurance company, and we have all the homes, the cars, everything we need. I'd really like to help to do something for you. And so he thought, well, I am having this icon made. And so well, she said, well, how much does it cost? And he was too embarrassed to give the full price. And even though when he told me what the full price was, it's not that much, but he gave her half the price. And she goes, are you sure that's it? And he goes, well, actually it's it's $1,500. And she goes, oh, you'll have a check in the mail. And so he calls me up, when I was still working at the time, and he calls me up, and he was so excited, that he was telling me the story of it. And then so then, like a couple of days later, he took a day off. He came back, and he got a message from iconographer that it's all done. He's just going to put, a final coat of varnish on it, and it'll be done. It could be picked up like on Friday. And then that evening, or the next day, he calls up the cabinet maker just to see an update. He hasn't heard from either one of these in like 6 months. And He says, Father, you just beat me to the phone. I was just going to call you. Your cabinet's all done. And by the way, the company I work for, they're doing everything. And so we went down on Friday, October 7th, Our Lady of the Rosary, and we brought the cabinet down. The iconographer put the icon in, and we got everything that day. And he was able to give, to give the payment because he had just gotten the check, like the day before. So everything as far as the icon, a very providential story. And I only mentioned that because that was part of my write up, is how it came together. And then what I was seeing as far as a prayerful interpretation of the icon.
Yeah.
I saw the cabinet being Saint Joseph, and that this was his kind of his interior, which is Our Lady. I'll share it with you sometimes, and maybe we could put a link.
Yes, please send me, because I know a
Yeah,
number of people will be interested in that specifically.
it's a
Um,
beautiful icon. But so what happened later on? I sent to our archbishop at the time, um, because we actually drove around and gave all the bishops. We have 3 bishops in Connecticut, and actually a 4th. We have an Eastern Rite bishop too. So we went around to all the bishops, gave them the images of the icon. Just ahead of, we found out that a local friend who was freelancing for our archdiocesan newspaper, he wrote an article on the icon.
oh wow.
We didn't even know it. And then we hear, oh, by the way, this article's coming out on the icon. And Father Stanley got so nervous. He's like, oh, we got to make sure the bishops know about this. We don't want them to just hear about it
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
and so we ran around giving everybody. And then later on, I wrote to our archbishop, and I had a booklet, made up. And over time, it just kept on kind of being refined. And but I shared with him, and so he wrote back and he says, we can have the icon, we can have, how the icon came to be and what went into the icon, but he really doesn't want any interpretations of the icon. And so basically at that time, the message had to be separated from the icon, which at the time, sometimes, we're told something and we may rebel a little bit, but then over time, I saw the grace of it. I saw, okay, no, this is perfect. This is, what it should be. And so what had happened was, so I started this apostolate, is just, called St. Joseph's Place, referring to the idea of St. Joseph's Place in the earthly Trinity of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And so we used to have holy cards we had made up of the icon. And so what Father Stanley said, well, why don't, here I have this other image of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Why don't we use that? Or why don't you use that and to introduce, your message on St. Joseph? And so that's what we did. And so we ordered cards. And again, this is back when everything was slow, in the sense of, now if we order something, we get email responses typically, and we're given approximate dates, and we're known when everything ships. Well, back then it's like you have to order something by mail. You have to write something out and order, and you send them a check, and you don't always know when something is shipped, because they'd have to mail to you, because again, no email, no anything. This was 1996. This is November-ish of 1996. And he asked me, "Is like, do you think the cards will come this coming week?" It was approaching Thanksgiving, and I said, "No, with the holidays and stuff, I don't think so. I think it'll probably be the following week or so." And he woke up. His anniversary of being at St. Martha's, his 25th anniversary, was that Wednesday. And he woke up, and he says he never does this, but this is the day that I say, he wrote an article on it, a day I'll always remember. And he said, Lord, today's my anniversary of being here. And he said, Aaron says that, these cards will not come today. If it's your will that this apostolate, and I'm paraphrasing, but if it's your will that this apostolate is of you, have the cards come today. And we had 8 o'clock mass. It was either 8 or 8:30, but whatever it is. And so after mass, I ended up going, walking back to the rectory, and Father Stanley stayed in our adoration chapel for a little bit. And normally UPS delivers around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But I go around the corner of a building, and the UPS driver is there. And he has all these boxes. And I'm like, Albert, why are you here so early? I got all these boxes. I got to get them off my truck.
Oh,
And so I go running back. And Father Stanley, when he talks about it, he said, because I was wearing work boots at the time, and all he said, he just hears the thump, in the
yeah.
parking. And I go in, I go on one knee next to his chair, and I go, they're here. And I didn't even know that he had prayed about that. I just, and so he come out, and then later on he told me what had happened. And then there was other things throughout the day. I don't necessarily want to, it was a beautiful day, but it was other things that related to St. Joseph. We ended up getting a statue that day because, well, maybe
we have about 2 more minutes, just so you know.
Okay. So basically, yeah. So it was a beautiful day. There is more to the story, but it was a beautiful, very confirmation for him, and it was a very spiritual consolation for me.
Okay.
Once I saw everything. So, and then well, when I was just starting religious life, I, I saw, like, we have Brother Elias, Brother Sebastian, whatever, brothers or priests who would take, spiritual name, sometimes a different name than their baptismal name. And I remember, like one time I was sorting the mail, and I said, Brother Elias was still known as John Smith. And I'm like, and the thought in my mind was, if I was going to change the name, I was going to do it legally. And so that was always in the back of my head. And so again, it was a very providential story. We don't have time for it, but on October 15th, 1996, I legally changed my name from Aaron Miles Brooks to Aaron Joseph. And the way I look at it, and again, it was very providential happening. There's another long story, but the way I look at it is, and it's not to a statement, but it's something that I keep in front of myself is, I did it as a public witness that, the patron of the church is my patron, the idea of taking him as a father. And typically we do take the family name of our fathers,
Yep.
And so, that was it. So the idea, like, I'm to live as a son of Joseph, but also Aaron, some say that it means one of light or enlightener. And so I look at it as, again, my responsibility is to be able to Joseph. And so that's how I look at that too. So I founded, and it really, I call this, when we got the cards, I call that the founding day of St. Joseph, our patron. And so, I now have the apostolate, and it's, the message has been refined over the years. In 2020, so I have an apostolate introduction. I have an essay on St. Joseph's place in the earthly Trinity. And I have a litany of the earthly Trinity, which I wrote during the pandemic year because.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see that for sure. The thing that stands out through the whole thread, and to your point, it's not it gives context, the childhood, but what the gift that is just present through the whole thing is this insane discernment that you have. So what a gift that is. So many people yearn.
Yeah. Like I said, even from asking that my blood family leave me alone, that I would find them later, God has been there, and I'm very grateful for it. And I just want to encourage other people to just be open to how God is working in the.
You nailed it. And so, Aaron, thank you. Please, if you can, anything that you reference, just send that to me so I can put it in the show details. That would be really helpful. And everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you always for sharing and liking and commenting. And until next time, take care and God bless.